Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's precisely 9 o'clock, as I can see on the watch there on the wall. Welcome to this first morning session of today, and welcome to actually the first in a series of the actually thematic session naming Inspire Thinking Out of the Box. So if you look at the program, you will see that this series of session will continue also this afternoon and tomorrow. Okay, in the first session we have 5 interesting presentations. My name is s.w.o.t. I'm from Joint Research Center, European Commission, and it's my pleasure to chair this first session of today. So just not to waste our time, I think we can immediately start. The first presentation will be about INSPIRE-SWOT and will be given by Bruce and his colleague Dara. So Bruce and Dara, please.
Good morning. Can everybody hear me? Yeah, good. My name is Dara Kyo. I work in a company called GeoDirectory, and this is a presentation, joint presentation between myself and Bruce McCormack. I will do the first sort of 20 slides or so really quickly, and then Bruce will come in at the end. What we've done here is looked at the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats, and a way forward for Inspire. How is it going? And how can it be improved, basically. And we did this through, there's a little bit about myself. I'm not going to go through that because we actually thought we had more time than we had, so I'm just going to move quickly through this presentation. So the aims of the presentation is to look at the availability of the data sets under the Inspire GeoPortal, to do a SWOT, and then make suggestions about how things can be improved for Inspire going into the future. So we're going to outline the data on the Inspire GeoPortal, the SWOT, and the way forward. So this is the GeoPortal homepage. So we've drilled through basically used the GeoPortal, the homepage and pages within to drill up some information for these slides. Okay, so these slides are looking at the number of data sets that countries have available under the Inspire directive, and many have very few, is what this slide says. Very few. And then even on the teams themselves, there's a lot of stuff missing, basically. What we saw was that the EU Commission did a report in 2016, and they said there was about 56,000 data sets available under the Inspire teams. And when we looked at it, we actually saw that over half were just related to one theme, which was land use. And then if you look at the contrast, we saw, say for example, Poland had about 20,000 data sets available under land use of the 56,000 or so, and Ireland had 1. Okay, thing is, Ireland 1 covers all land use. It's 100% coverage. We don't know. So the fact that you have loads of data sets doesn't mean you have 100% coverage. The fact that you only have 1 doesn't mean you have no coverage either. So it's very hard to judge it just looking at statistics. But what this says is that very many of the teams have very little data across many countries. So there's a limited focus, and there's quite a bit of stuff. Sorry, there's a bit of typo here that isn't yet there or anywhere near there. And we think there's a wider, deeper review needed, not just on the volume, but on the detail behind it. So what we did was we created a questionnaire. This is not a academic research project. And what we decided to do was go to people who are practitioners in the area, who work with Inspire, who use Inspire, and get their views. And we asked across Europe, it's a snapshot if you like, and we asked them very, very broad questions, just 5 or 6 very simple questions. What are the strengths of Inspire? What are the main weaknesses? What are the opportunities? What are the threats? Have you been directly involved in Inspire? The answer was yes for all. And what sector do you work in? Okay, so this is a practitioner's view of what's going on. People who are charged with implementing, using, and providing data under Inspire. So So from the strengths, I'm going to go through the way the presentation is going to work is we're going to highlight the main things we've seen and then give you some quotes to support these. So the response was, look, it was great that it had a standardization aspect to it. Interoperability, harmonization, a common approach, basically. That was a great idea and makes sense across Europe. Open access, easier to discover, more data readily available, and aware of the benefits of organising spatial data. Now, it's the awareness levels will be something that will come on to in weaknesses as well, and somebody to champion INSPIRE. So here's some of the quotes, which are really verbatim. It's objectivities, it's objective, it's great. It's pulled together 28 and more member states to have a commonish approach. So it's standard without being a hard standard. It does not require data collection and capture, so that made it easier to get across the line. Nothing new needed to be done. Uses recognised standards. Has a maintenance process, but then the comment is no matter however flaky. So there's standards again with a small s rather than a big S. And it has a regulatory framework. I'm not going to read every single comment because I'm going to run out of time, but just to pick out a few of them. It's a detailed guidelines of 34 spatial data themes, relevant for environmental applications where specified. That was good. It was authoritative data set and web accessible and interoperable. That was again good. Probably not as web accessible as it should be in today's environment, but at the time when it was created, it was good. It's greatly improved discovery of spatial data. So it's brought awareness levels up, which is good. And it's encouraging coordination, draws on existing global standards, and universally it's agreed it's a good thing. But a universally agreed good thing and actually everything happening are two different worlds. Okay, so it's good idea. That's what we're getting here. From a weakness point of view, really the biggest weakness is complexity. It's too complex. It's too big of an ask. It's burdensome, it's difficult to implement, and it's costly. So while there's no new data needed, somebody trying to standardise all of these many data sets is across so many themes is too complex. There seems to be a sense that there's limited actual use case studies or few practical benefits. So people who are charged with looking for budget for this can't point to success stories anywhere. Okay, they're finding it really difficult to find a big success story that says, yeah, this has got great value, this is going to increase something for us, some sort of major benefit. And this group saw a need for a sort of a champion of the whole project across Europe, that somebody was very recognisable that would champion it right throughout Europe and charge forward with it. And then, there's a sense that when this INSPIRE was created, many of the technologies and the data sets that are available now weren't available. And so this open data initiative, how does INSPIRE fit with that? That needs to be a linked data, the architecture that's used in IT sense. All that needs to be re-looked at. So again, this is the actual responses, the complexity, implementing rules, technical guides, specifications. Maybe somebody saw too high a focus on geographical data and the gap between the SDI and other kinds of data. Overly burdensome on low-level public authorities with limited resources. Limited really good examples where it made a difference, but maybe it's still too early to show that. It's too complex, it's too complex, it's too complex. It's all the time kept back, complex. Okay? Maybe it isn't easy to make it simple, but there's definitely a demand from the ground up to make it easier to use. Maybe focus, narrow the themes and just go with a couple, or and make them all work and then spread it out. But maybe there's as we'll say later on, an INSPIRE Lite. 2 levels: basic INSPIRE, advanced INSPIRE. Okay, bottom up. INSPIRE uses a top-down specification-driven STI approach, while meanwhile bottom up and citizen-driven option data initiatives taken off. How do we involve the crowd, basically, right? It's just not easy to implement. It's just complex, and really that came across very strongly. Limited real use outside catalogues. That's not what you want to hear. It's not operational. GML is ideal, but not yet operational. The priorities are not pragmatic enough. It's not seen as being a real-world benefit. It's really coming back to this all the time. lack of communicating benefits for a large set of stakeholders. So it's raised awareness of data and geographical data and all environmental data sets around that, but not how it can benefit everybody. Again, the need for ZAR. So, so do you want to take over here, Bruce? Will I continue? You?
Yeah,
okay, so I'm going to hand over to Bruce now. We're very, very smooth, huh? And let him carry on from here.
Thanks, Dara. I won't actually go through this very much because what I'd like to do is rather get on to the way forward stuff. Will all be available. This is apparently being videoed, and it'll be on the website. Does that? Sorry, which is the button? Sorry, which is the button?
You just go down, the button down.
Oh, there. Yeah. Opportunities, you'll be able to see all of those. Obviously, we can't go through all of that. There's more opportunities. Threats, there's a whole bunch of threats sitting there. So I've got 4 minutes left, so I'm just running through all of this. I won't go through that. Threats, these are the detailed threats. The overall evaluation, complexity, that comes out absolutely all the time. And it's got to be addressed. Now, I've got a little bit of stuff here, which is a complete makeup, to trying to take, for example, the complexity. Now, I've personally, in Ireland, been involved in particularly one data set. That's the one that Dara was mentioning earlier, which was the land use one. And we had to get over 400 different data sets into a harmonized interoperable kind of framework. It took, for that one data set, it took between maybe 5 to 7 years to actually get that one done. The complexity, I can assure you, was huge around one data set in one country, and we were absolutely determined to make it happen. The slightest lower level of determination, and I can assure you right now it wouldn't have happened, because there's so much, all sorts of complexity out there, and you have to get over that. There's a number of numbers and all sorts of things there, which, because of the time, I can't really go into. But complexity, there's got to be ways of trying to come forward with a simpler arrangement. Just what we did here, and I can't go through all of these. Again, I'm looking up at the clock there, 3 minutes. And just a thought that occurred is, what were things like back in 2007? And what has happened since 2007. Now, there's a list there. Again, haven't got the time to go through it, but a lot of changes. But not only what's happened between then and now, what we actually should be doing is looking into the future and what's coming down the track, so we can future-proof INSPIRE for the world that's actually coming. And I've listed some of the things here: machine learning, robots, 3D, 4D, quantum computing, all sorts of different things. Now, this is just a big picture kind of overview. Pre-SDIs, everybody in their organizations had their own little data sets. SDIs, as traditionally came along, which I've called SDI 1.0, was really to try and link up these different data sets so that you can actually stand and get a picture across all of them. But essentially that data that we were looking at was kind of, inverted commas, historical. It was like census stuff, or what the land use pattern was from some satellite stuff 2 years ago, etc., etc. But the world that we're now in is very, very different. It's all about real time. It's on mobile phones or all sorts of devices. There's massive amounts of data coming, absolutely overwhelming. Huge amounts of spatial data. And when you think of driverless cars, it's just extraordinary what's coming in terms of data, and it's all real time. That's where the whole terrain has moved. Again, I don't have the time, but anyway, what I'm suggesting is we need a jump on from SDI, what I call SDI 1, to SDI 2. The way forward, and the vision, widely accepted, it's absolutely wonderful, and people like me are completely committed to it, and everybody who knows me, I've been pushing at every opportunity to inspire. However, I think we're at the crossroads, and the report which Dara referred to earlier, which was produced last year by the Commission, which was based on review of half-term review of 2013-14, it makes for sobering reading, actually, when you read that. And the kind of issues that we picked up as some of the weaknesses and the particular weaknesses and the threats, you could see it coming through in a much more organized way in that particular report. We're at the crossroads. Three broad options for the way forward. I can't really go into them. One is to continue with the suggestions made in that report, that last year report by the Commission. They make at the end a number of recommendations. And essentially that's very much within the current framework, but doing a bit of tweaking here and there. So another way forward is significantly up the level of interventions, think out the box, which is the theme of this. And I particularly, time's up. Anyway, I was involved in 2005, just one maybe quickly. And I asked a question to the JRC people and the Commission people at the time, as I was representing Ireland. I said to them, is there going to be any money actually for Ireland from the European Union to support us? No, was the answer. No, but there will be, FP6, FP7s and all this kind of stuff. But to be able to deal with the complexity, one of the suggestions there is that you need actually dedicated funds from the European Union. I think, for example, of the Common Agricultural Programme, huge amounts of money coming in a focused, coordinated kind of way. With us, no, it's up to the member states. Okay, there's Horizon 2020 and all that sort of stuff. And then number three, which is a broad way forward, is a really substantial adaptation to try and take account of where we are at now and those things that are coming down the track. I haven't got time to go into all this. There's some thoughts here. Essentially what I'm saying down there is right near the bottom, how to take forward from today. We would suggest another comprehensive review with an absolute urgency. So in other words, you're not looking at 2013-14 data and producing a report in somewhere fairly late in 2016. It actually has to turn around much, much more quickly because we actually, I think, are pretty much a crossroads with INSPIRE. Finally, the INSPIRE is a really great initiative. It really, really is. It's a great vision, hugely ambitious, and I think Europe can be extremely proud of what we've attempted to take on here. It's actually, and for me, it's been an honor to participate in it. What we really, really want is to succeed, and to succeed not just well, but very, very well. And to do that, we have to come up to date and take what's coming down the track, which is one of those slides here. We have to take that, and urgently we need to actually have a thorough relook and take really that option number 3, which I had going back there, which is a significant advancement in the way forward for INSPIRE. 3 minutes late.
Thank you, Bruce and Dara, for interesting presentation. I think we will put the questions at the end of the session, so we just continue with the presentation. So if you have any questions, please write it down, and then at the end, after all, we will go for questions. So the next speaker is my colleague Wanda from JRC, and she will present how much INSPIRE counts for digital single market.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a very good opportunity to have a session to think out of the box and spell out what we have been thinking during all this year, or 1 year more of implementation of INSPIRE. So how much INSPIRE counts for the digital single market? We heard yesterday in the plenary session that no doubt INSPIRE is part of it and is already a big player, but it's not enough to have this conviction we are sure that it's such like that, we need at a certain point to be able to quantify somehow, even if most of the things can be in a qualitative way. So INSPIRE, just to recall, that is a spatial data infrastructure, and there are different ways of defining it and putting the role on that. All talk about the components, all talk about the role the user has to play when performing and what for SDI is about. In all, we talk about data, service, and so on, but also institutional frameworks, policies, human resources. And once we come to the definition of INSPIRE within the directive, we see that other than data and services is also considered the agreements of sharing data, the need for a coordination and monitoring the mechanisms and the mechanisms put in place to get this done. And also, as a role, important role is to assist the policy making, in particular in the domain of the environment. So this slide looks back to a session we have Tuesday on showing INSPIRE as a whole infrastructure in a different way that was presented by my colleague Giri, that is here somewhere in the room. And this analysis was based on the metadata available within the European Geoportal, with whole limitations and so on. We know all about it. And what it's here on that picture is that the metadata that was already that was available in 2014, and what is the metadata available in the European Geoportal in 2016. So the way when we have this triannual monitoring and reporting initiative, and what we see here is everything changed within this lapse of time. And we see in some countries, I hope probably it's not very visible from your place, but we see that in some countries there was enormous consolidation of the metadata made available. Like when you see here Spain and Poland, where we pass from a huge amount of metadata available to a more consolidated, less, obviously, metadata available, but it means that within the countries there have been restructuring in a way, and the decisions taken what is necessary, what was worthwhile to submit as INSPIRE data and services. We see a group of countries on the top with the Scandinavian countries, where everything has been consolidated from 2014 and 16, and we see countries that appears there with a big bubble, like Italy, that in 2014 was not very much present, but in 2016, yes, here it is. And as a general idea we get is everything grows in one way or another in all countries. Now, why it happens? It means that there were, within the countries, organizational conditions that allows the countries to go through a revision of what was done so far and start putting the things in order just to better make use of what have been implemented so far. So not all countries can start doing the same thing at the same time and with the same speed. But what is important to see is from where each country starts and to where they want to go at the end. So, as I said, as all know, INSPIRE builds upon the SDIs established and operated by member states. But we know, and it was said also yesterday in several presentations, that it's a part of the whole business. So the national spatial data infrastructure is a part of a wider government data infrastructure, and the infrastructure is exactly what makes the data as a public asset. And we also all know that spatial data is a dimension of all types of data because everything happens somewhere. So, exactly at the time where the spatial data is integrated with other data that some people recognize correctly that is not part of the scope of INSPIRE, but once these type of data are all put together, the real value of the spatial data brings up in a much stronger way. So, no doubt that INSPIRE is operating the digital transformation that was explained in the first plenary sessions of yesterday. And it's also part of the digital single market. The digital single market has, just to recall, just to give concept, is based on 3 pillars. One, the access of better access for consumers and business to digital goods and services across Europe. The second one on to build up the right environment for digital networks and innovative service to flourish. And the third pillar, the economy and society, maximizing the growth, the potential of the digital economy. That's so my new unit in the GRC is dealing with these things. So if you look closer to this pillar and taking also into consideration what was said yesterday, so digital single market already start delivering things, and there are several initiatives already available through this priority action of the Commission. One of them, so the digitizing industry, including the European Cloud Initiative, and so on. One of them is regarding e-government. We have been listening to several sessions yesterday. And the principles for this e-government action plan, that is the way how to implement the objectives under the e-government, if you look at them, we recognize that are very much close to the principles you see in INSPIRE. So everything is perfect. No doubt that INSPIRE is operating under the e-government, and it's an important player because people that are doing one thing are, in most of the cases, the same that are also implementing INSPIRE. These things have been already measured somehow, and the digital transformation is measured by the Digital Economy and Society Index, which is a composite indicator of how Europe performs this digital transformation. And it's based on 5 dimensions. This assessment was done for the year 2016. Interesting, at the same time, we have the monitoring and reporting of the INSPIRE directive. So we can start comparing what is one and what is there if we can see the reflex of INSPIRE on those type of assessments. And so those dimensions are, let's say, defined within different fields and represented by indicators. I'm not going into these details. All those things are published in the Commission sites. There is an horizontal report that makes the analysis across all the countries, and then there are national reports for each one of these dimensions. We find in the digital public services one of these dimensions, obvious, and is evaluated through the e-government. One of the indicators of this e-government is the open data, which is defined as how the government commits to open data. And it's assessed for 2016 at the EU level, about 59%. So half, let's say, the governments are already implementing such things. And in fact, when we look at the INSPIRE reports, we see a lot of cross-reference about the effect of INSPIRE in the open data and the other way around. So looking closer to the digital public service, how it means, so without going into details, so the methodology that was followed was to focus on 8 live events that were analyzed in terms of how the citizens interact with the public authorities through the web and on online channels that can also be mainly by the use of pre-compiled forms and the availability of online services for that. So all those things are well explained. And then we see that on that approach, we see the interaction between the public administration and the citizens. But we don't consider at all the interactions between public administrations. So how they also have, let's say, a gain to take out of it. And the interactions between the public administrations and the private, for instance. Another way of measuring the progress and how good countries have been performing is the state of play of the interoperability. So those reports, again, once more published for 2016. This is the way the ISA2 program is measuring the interoperability framework, the European interoperability framework, so all across Europe. And again, we have their reports for each country, and we immediately have the temptation to compare how INSPIRE is projected on those reports, meaning what, by reading both, we can have an idea how good those things are depicted or not. So we also heard yesterday that INSPIRE is already is already one of the actions of the e-government action plan. We have an article that is Article 17 that specifically says that further support implementation and enhancement of the INSPIRE directive through the use of geospatial data in digital public service. Here is a hint for these, let's say, resources, fundings that people are looking for and not always so obvious to find, but this is a way. Please link there. Another way is just by, it's a side comment, is the call that was published or is going to be published on CEF, just to help on the building up the infrastructure when countries goes together and apply for this type of resources. I mean, just comes to my mind just by saying that. So. So no doubt what is the role of INSPIRE on that business of the digital single market, but we can see, as I said, that public administration is not looked at. So what is the effect? And of course the organizational aspects not at all, because it goes hand in hand with the INSPIRE implementation. When we see the experience from the implementation of INSPIRE, we see in previous conference and whenever there is a presentation that countries, member states representatives says that to address implementation challenges requires overcome organizational coordination and regulatory issues. This is part of the complexity that I heard in the first intervention. The existence of national strategies are fundamental. Without a strategy, it's not possible to make a sound plan and have a roadmap to follow. And also, of course, it's also necessary the coherence between policies, but not only at the European level, but also at national level, which means that whenever a country starts to put in place a strategy, they had in mind what are the priority policies that they need to address at the national level, and then to put their own roadmap to, let's say, comply at the end with the roadmap for the implementation of INSPIRE. And this is, again, another aspect of the complexity that we cannot avoid. So if you look back to the directive and what the directive asks to monitor in terms of the progress is how public sector provides and users of special data sets and service. So the coordination that is necessary, the relationships with the third parties, the organization and of the quality assurance that was also that have been already taken into consideration by the countries once things starts to be implemented and used. It also asks the contribution made by the public authorities or third parties to the functioning of the infrastructure, the information about the use, the data sharing agreements that are established between the public authorities and the Commission, but okay, and the cost and benefits. All those things, as you know, are, let's say, reflected in the country fiches that countries are going to use in the future, but they are also already reflected in the reports that countries have been submitting, in particular in 2016, to the Commission to monitor. The benefits of INSPIRE are reported in a very particular way, so they are in line with what is asked in the directive to monitor. But those ways, although already, let's say, pointed out in the directive itself, we still don't have a coherent, a common way of presenting this in a way that is comparable through countries. Not only because not all countries has the same experience when start using INSPIRE, and so the premise is that we cannot use what is not yet implemented. If you cannot use, we cannot get benefits out of it. So those things, there is a big gap always between the time there is a vision, the thing starts to be implemented, we start realizing problems, the ways, probably there is a better way to do things, we start improve, we start use, get benefits, let those benefits be known. We are at the stage that I'm convinced that you need to find a common way to organize the benefits, a kind of a taxonomy for those benefits that you are able to, let's say, to report and to explain to the others, that to the ones, I mean, to the policymakers that need to invest on how to continue the implementation and improve it, that it's a benefit for that. So we see those things, let's say, those benefits reflecting, so the things I said before, no time to go through. But we are also at the point, since the world changed.
Sorry, 1 minute.
Yeah. So I pass to the conclusion. So the world changed, and the way we are used to evaluate to costs and benefit must be seen in light of the enhanced accountability of the expenses and revenues. All those things have been changing, and not and also the need to consider that new processes of work are in place. They need to be rethinked to as a way of take the profit of what is implemented with INSPIRE, and so on. So the data has to be reused, the services are shared, the resources are shared, and there are a certain number of benefits that becomes visible that are not yet, let's say, quantified or assessed in the common way by all countries. So it's not enough to measure the performance, because the performance concerns the functionalities, and you need to go further than that. We need to go also the social and the organizational conditions that leads to the implementation, and in particular, even more important, the use of the infrastructure. It was highlighted like the usability, the readiness for make profit of what is already implemented. So I skip, I just come to the conclusions. First, to be able how much INSPIRE counts for the digital single market, we need first of all to know how much we achieve already with the implementation of INSPIRE, going through the elements I said before. But we also need, if you want to present it in policy terms, we also need to know how INSPIRE operates the digital transformation, meaning how much INSPIRE contributes implementing the policy actions of e-government. So like this, people find a sense on when comparing all those reports, and how much INSPIRE contribute implementing the policy actions of digital single market, which are, of course, broader than the ones of the e-government, but they are very much related with them. So INSPIRE is a front runner for all these issues. We start, let's say, early in time when things were not yet mature enough to fully understand what INSPIRE is about. Now things are changing, and we have to, let's say, to fill in this gap in a faster way. So what we need is we need to conceptualize and develop a comprehensive frame to assess digital transformation, where the spatial data infrastructure play a considerable role. And in that case, we talk about INSPIRE because it's the only legal and technical frame that is available so far. And of course, for that, building upon the achievements and the experiences already gained in those years of the implementation, the INSPIRE monitoring and reporting, so point already in the right direction, so and so, more or less. As I said, I think there is still a considerable work, conceptual work to do, to put those things, let's say, in a way that are comparable across countries. So we need, as usual, more coordination at national level to put all those policies and the way you report on them together. And when INSPIRE is playing a role, just make this evident. And you also need to keep this coordination and cooperation at the EU level, where those policies and, let's say, the actions that are putting forward to implement them take into the real consideration the role of the public administration, how it interacts between them and with the others. Oh yeah, I stopped. It's finished. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wanda. We move to the next one immediately, which will be the joint presentation from GRC and Gartner. It will not be presented but from Maria Teresa, as it is written in the program, but by David, Clementine, and Ray. So please, the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you. So my name is David Alessi. I'm from Gartner, and together with my colleague Clementine and Ray from the Joint Research Center, we were presenting a bit about the EU location framework blueprint and how this is really paving the road to digital government. So first, I will quickly introduce on what we understand as the concept of digital government. And what we really see is that location data really underpins the transformation towards digital government. So in general, traditional e-government settings, location data is used like paper on raster maps for really back office ICT, or GIS for example in web presence. So, but what you really see right now is that economic growth and really the need to change is really driving this way to have location data as a part of digital government. So you would have really location intelligence as part of your governmental program. So what do we mean by this in a platform setting? So really these digital platforms, they are really enabling this, this transformation to digital governments. And they are using location data in combination with intelligence layer on top to really support the capabilities of a number of public services. So we understand digital platforms as having 4 different aspects. So citizens, ecosystems that are the part of it, the IT systems that are the backbone, and then things, for example, the Internet of Things, like connected cars, they are really censoring all the data. And the location data, on top of that, brings that intelligence. So an example of this in a discussion we had on Monday at the same conference is, for example, the X-Road of Estonia. So they really use the backbone of by the Estonian government, and a large ecosystem around that has been built by different public and private parties that are really utilizing this data around it. So the ULF blueprint really paved the way in this ambitious context, and Clementine will talk about this.
Thank you, David. How are we going to actually implement this merge of location data and digital government services? Referring to the previous discussion, the previous presentation, location data has much more added value when it's combined with other data. So at the JRC, together with the team of Maria Teresa and Ray, we have worked on a very thorough document called the European Union Location Framework Blueprint to actually guide how to implement this. And the benefits of this common framework, which is the first answer to the previous presentation, is that if everybody adopts it, we are leaping towards cross-border and cross-sector interoperability. So thanks to this integrated approach, which is funded by the interoperability program of the European Commission, location data is an integrated part of digital government. So how does this blueprint work? Basically, it's actually structured around a series of recommendations, a bit like the European Union Interoperability Framework. But it has also a series of targeted roles because the blueprint addresses a very wide audience. And so in a very pragmatic way, you can read the blueprint also according to your role, whether you're a policymaker, a data manager, etc., etc. So one of the main benefits of this blueprint is that it also highlights the value of location data to e-government specialists, to digital transformation specialists. I think the slide is heavy. I'll try it again. So it is structured around 5 key focus areas. Obviously, the policy aspect is very important to raise awareness among policymakers. The digital government integration is a key element, obviously, in reaping the most benefits out of location data. Standardization and reuse is an integral part of any interoperability document. Obviously, we're all interested in what about my return on investment. So this section has a lot of elements that I think are extremely important in this context. And of course, you want to build enough capabilities in terms of governance and partnerships to make this work, because it's really a teamwork. How is the document structured? There's 19 recommendations that actually implement or show the way to implement this vision of an integrated approach in between location data and e-government. Each recommendation has a similar structure. It highlights the reason of this recommendation, also how to actually implement it. There's a thorough work on best practices, so it's a very hands-on document. And a series of annexes structure the content in various ways, including further reading and also the famous role-based methodology. The blueprint is also a backbone, a structuring document that leads to more detailed documentation. And so each recommendation will have a pointer to another more in-depth document that is very relevant. For example, the first one I can cite is the guidelines for aligning the use of location data in EU policy. Another very relevant one is the last one, the guidelines on architectures and standards for SDIs and e-government, and so on. So it's also a really a backbone and a structure that points to other relevant documentation. The role-based approach is very pragmatic. I've already touched upon this one, and it presents all the recommendations according to in which phase of my project I am. For example, as a policymaker, I will prepare legislation, adopt, implement, and apply it, and each recommendation, therefore, is classified according to each phase of each role. We have a few slides on all the different recommendations. I will not go through them, but I think one that's relevant to highlight is, of course, recommendation 7, which is part of the digital government integration. Use INSPIRE and the SDI models, data and services for delivering digital public services. So this leads back to what was said in the previous talk. We need to make sure that SDI is part of the larger e-government frameworks. Another relevant one that I would like to highlight today, is the one about managing location data quality. I think this is a big challenge for you people nowadays, is what is quality? How do we define fit for purpose? I know there's a separate session especially on this. There's 3 recommendations on return on investment and another 3 on governance. So how do we find this document? So it's online on the join-up platform of the European Commission, which gathers a lot of pragmatic information on sharing and reuse and on interoperability and on digital government. There's a specific community called the European Union Location Framework, and there is a tab in that community which really describes the blueprint in a web format. with the home page showing 2 different ways to access the document, whether you access it along focus areas or whether you access it through your role. Has everybody taken a picture of the address? Or yeah. Okay. Each recommendation is set out on 1 page, and then we have, of course, all the hyperlinks to best practices and to further reading. So, of course, we would like to have a way to monitor the implementation of the framework. And it's interesting to have an approach that is combined with the whole monitoring of interoperability by the European Commission. And this is what Ray has been working on in this last month, so I will give him the floor.
Hello, I'm part of the multi-headed monster as well. So, was the blueprint produced in a back room by researchers and consultants? No, it wasn't. It started life through a survey as part of the ISA programme, where we asked stakeholders across Europe, geospatial, e-government stakeholders, what was important in integrating geospatial in digital government. So this is not new. The framework was produced in its initial form based on that data, and we've tried to update it in ad hoc ways, taking account of some of these exciting new developments that are coming along. And we hope it works. We hope it's useful. But we want to test that out. And our next proposed step is to create a model for measurement. And we believe that the blueprint is a good basis for the model, and a maturity model type of approach, where you assess different levels of maturity, can be a good management tool within member states to help in their strategic planning, and maybe within organisations as well. So this is an example of one of the recommendations, and you'll see on their qualitative statements on maturity from a minimum level right up to an optimised level that's fulfilling the full aims of integrated location intelligence in line with digital government goals. So that's the general framework, and each of the recommendations has qualitative statements like this, and each of the recommendations is broken down into 3 or 4 topic areas to give some depth into the assessment. So that's what we're working on. And our intention here, subject to interest, is to use this for a periodic survey and assessment in member states to complement the national interoperability framework, but with a focus on location data, a periodic survey, so that we can keep the tools that we're creating up to date and helpful for you, and so that you know where you are. You can use it as a management tool if you wish to help plan your next steps. And as part of this approach, once we've completed the draft, the first draft of this model, we'd like to pilot it in a number of member states and shape the approach to be as usable as possible. So if you're interested, then please either tell Clementine at the end of this meeting, or come to the INSPIRE stand and say you might be interested in piloting this approach in the autumn, and help shaping the approach. So make it meet your needs. Get in early. So what do we want to do as part of this tool? It's currently on a spreadsheet. We think we should be putting it online, and then it could be useful, and multiple stakeholders then could maybe combine views. We're thinking weighted as well as the non-weighted assessments may be useful if there's some priorities that you want to include in there. And Clementine mentioned the role-based views that we have of the blueprint. We could have role-based views of the observatory. Technically, that's going to be quite easy to produce. It may be useful, it may not be useful. And we've produced this model to take a global view, a quite strategic view, but it could be, a variant could be produced for an individual organization to assess its maturity and to plan next steps. So a management tool. So we were asked by ISA stakeholders to produce some practical tools. Here's some practical tools that we've produced: a document, an online model, a maturity model, and we want you to consider them and to use them. So talk with us and give us your views on the best way that we can help you with these tools and contribute to them, because they can get better if you help us in developing these tools. Thank you.
Thank you all. We move to the next presentation, which will be from Contera and Mark Kliman. Mark, please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks for having me here. My name is Mark Kliman. I'm the manager responsible for e-government, open data, and open government at Contera. Many of you know Contera in the context of INSPIRE and SDI activities or our products. I will focus today on open data and open government in the context of INSPIRE. Basically, we define our role as the one to bridge the gaps between the geospatial data, so INSPIRE sources and resources, and open data providers and users basically on the other side, which has a technical component that we can bridge, talking about metadata, talking about data transformation, for instance, but also talking to users, doing workshops to find basically the user needs from people that are not sitting inside the box of INSPIRE. So why open data? Basically, from our perspective, open data is useful to improve transparency about, or in the way of thinking of decision taking, to share knowledge with citizens, for instance. The second main goal of sharing open data is basically to ask people to participate, especially outside of governments. And the third aim basically is improving collaboration. And this means basically inside governments, but also with organizations outside the governments. And basically we have done a couple of projects on local government level, regional level, federal level, and European level in the last 3 years. And I would like to share with you our experience with regard to 3 main projects. The first one is the European Data Portal. We are part of a consortium that is guided by Capgemini Consulting. And we are responsible for managing the data, which is the geospatial data. So basically what is now the main objective is to have a single shop or a single point of contact to look for data that is available across Europe. So our main goal is basically to harvest open data from public administrations. And when I talk about this data, I do not only mean basically the geospatial data that we are responsible for harvesting, but also for all the other data that is made available across Europe. So if you go to the portal, basically you get some first hints what we offer. It's about best practices, for instance, and recommendations with regard to metadata, talking about DKIP or national implementations like the German one, which is DKIP.de, which is right on the way to get published. Other things we do in this context is we train people that are interested in sharing data. So you find basically even webinars that you can participate. You will find examples of where this worked very well. And you will be able to find a lot of studies about landscaping activities, so which nation is doing what right now in the field of open data. And we share the components that are built in this project. Right now we have moved from starting at, I think 2 years ago, 180,000 data sets, now 745,000 data sets. We transfer the data, once we harvest data, basically into the other languages up to 24. So if your metadata is in French, for instance, we have an automatic way of translating it into the other languages. So to lower the barrier, basically, if you're not speaking French but interested in French data. The other things that we do is we go across a lot of countries, and we have now almost 80 catalogs that we harvest from. Now, what are the benefits actually of open data? This is a huge number. You don't need to know that basically, but it's huge enough to invest time to look into what are the benefits of open data. And if you look closer, which our colleagues from Capgemini did in the past, you can find economic benefits that are either direct or indirect. And on the direct side, you see even already a quite significant number of jobs that are created because of doing open data. And you have a lot of things or potential savings in public administration. If you talk to people that are doing already in the government's open data, you can hear lessons like, we did actually open data to get access to the data that is, let's say, boxed from the colleague next door. So it's really like lowering the barriers and giving access to data more quickly. On the other side, if you talk about indirect economic benefits, you see in the field of mobility, for instance, examples where you really can prove that there are, for instance, apps now built and available that help people saving time or even energy. Now, what about the reuse side? It's interesting now that our colleagues from Capgemini asked with University of Southampton and others, what is actually now the top domain that is the data, where the data is most used. And basically, not so surprising to us, but to them, basically, is that geospatial data is quite significant portion. So it's number 2, basically. And it might be even more than 25% because it's now overlapping with the definition of what is statistic data and what is company data. You can guess that this has a geospatial component as well. If you look at the top open data categories, basically you find a lot of topics where we feel very comfortable with doing our INSPIRE activities. So basically what we do in INSPIRE is very relevant for open data as a whole. If you look now into the field of what actually was the main benefit perceived by the people doing open data, the most people say it's helping us to do innovations. The other thing that you learn is basically that it helps reducing costs and increase efficiency. That's not surprising to us because we will later on show a couple of examples that prove basically that doing open data opens the door basically to get excellent idea and knowledge from outside of a government that helps basically either building new businesses or doing the administration part more efficiency. Now looking closer to the barrier side, our colleagues were coming up with this list basically saying, okay, of course we have very heterogeneous formats, standard structures. I think everyone in the room is very aware of that because that's why we do INSPIRE, to help on that side. The quality of the data is an issue for many people to do or to use more open data. That is, I think, reflected in part of metadata as well. That is not only a question of standardization, but also how well metadata is kept up to date. The interesting part is now, once we now have connected the nodes basically to get access from www.europeandataportal.eu, basically you will realize in the search that the quality of the search is very much dependent on the quality of the metadata. So now we are using the metadata and we are facing basically issues because maybe we are the first to use that, or maybe at least we are increasing the number of users, and that's why it's good to reflect and to invest more time in keeping and maintaining the metadata. Availability is another issue, and awareness as well. If you look closer into that basically and you focus on the open data provider side, basically the two main barriers were mentioned, that they are missing financial resources to do more open data, and legal questions are still around that are not solved. Interesting enough, some organizations, some administrations and governments were able to solve it. So maybe it's another step now to look how others are doing this and learn from others basically, and giving this up to a level where basically, let's say, not local level decisions are made, but also regional decisions are made to help the local level to sort it out. On the other side, so the reusing side of open data, basically a lot of people are not aware where to get the data from. Some people are very impressed to see that there is something like INSPIRE, so happy to share the knowledge, but that's one message to take, that not that much people are having access to INSPIRE resources, so it's good to help lowering this barrier. And the second thing is basically low availability. So we are on a way of getting more and more open data, but in fact, there's still room for improvement. So this is how the portal looks like. Basically, you find a lot of other resources that I mentioned before. Now I would like to focus on an example that we are supporting in Germany. The first hackathon was conducted by the federal government of traffic and digital infrastructure in 2015. Basically, hackathon, you may be aware, our colleagues like Antje Kükler here in the room basically did this on Tuesday, I think, here as well. You invite people, share data, and ask them to come up with new ideas. That's an open innovation approach and method. This was done on the federal level, and 55 people came around, were in this building for 24 hours, had 20 data sets, and came up with 11 new ideas and concepts. We had 3 minutes to present this. And the end of the game was basically we were succeeding as a team of Conterra, Esri, and Geocom, and were invited to apply for money basically given by the federal ministry to further work on an idea that we called real-time traffic management and access to mobility data marketplace, which is actually a new idea of reusing data sources to have prioritized routes for citizens that are not looking for the quickest way, but also for routes that are recommended with low impact on infrastructure or habitats, for instance. So more on a kind of ecological way of thinking. Now, we had then received money basically to work on this, and one of the things we did was basically, we first of all said, okay, it's not a future, not a good idea to stick with 20 datasets that come along with a USB stick. So we needed to have access to a more centralized platform, which is this mobility data marketplace. And we realized quickly that 80 of 85 datasets were in a format called DATEX 2, which all people working in the traffic field are aware, and no other one has a clue about it. So we've said, okay, we transform this into GeoJSON, for instance, and REST interface in order to facilitate access. And 1 year later, basically, we offered this to the next generation of hackathon participants that were very, very happy to see a very more easy and used format that they can work with to work on their ideas. Another example, basically, we are working on is called Berlin Minecraft, or you can have right now access to Ober-Urselcraft as well. What we did was basically taking up or following up an idea proposed by the Technology Stiftung Berlin. They said, okay, Minecraft is the most used and most famous video game, and basically people are there just meeting and designing worlds, but they start from scratch. But what happened, what would happen basically if we give them a world that they live in, which is now the city of Berlin. And we said, okay, there are a lot of resources out there, you know, CityGML, for instance, or other 3D models of cities, and other resources that you can use. In Berlin, it's open data anyway, and we took then different sources, basically, like the rivers, basically, as you see here, the buildings, etc. So that was already the outcome. We merged, actually, using FME, a lot of resources from government and from OpenStreetMap to come up with this one model that was shared then with people, like young people and older people that are interested in redesigning the world. And this is now a kind of participation approach in city planning. that was followed up now 2 times already. And you will realize that this is a way of bringing INSPIRE-based data to people in a new format that have no clue basically about standardization, but would like to use the data. And right now in Oberursel, which is in Germany right now a project, there they basically are now collecting a lot of ideas to think about how they can change a central station area basically, and you will be surprised if you follow up the links later on what fascinating ideas they come up with. So I hope basically that gave you some ideas about how basically INSPIRE resources are are valuable for the process of open data. Basically, I would say on the open data side, there are a lot of users sitting and waiting for good data, and INSPIRE helps us basically to harmonize and standardize access. And but we need to think about bringing data in a format, in a way, to people that are not having the time to think of OGC standards or INSPIRE standards. Okay, thanks a lot. If you have time, we are at the booth.
Thank you very much, Mark. So we move to the last presenter in the session. Joachim, please.
Yes. Just a moment. It's in French. I can close the presentation.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so.
Okay, this one. Yes.
Okay, perfect. Here you are.
So, thank you for the introduction. I am talking from the point of view of a data producer. You see here a building model, Augsburg, based on the cadastral map in the level of detail 2. So the task of us is how to bring these data to INSPIRE. Yes. In Germany, we have the federal system, and we have 2 standards. We have the one standard defined by the ADV. It's quite CityGML, and we have another standard, GeoInfo. It's from the same ADV, and it's based on the Cadastre and so on. So we have nationwide uniform data structures and data formats. Both standards are based on XML, GML, and so for us it's quite common to swap between these standards and do the data transformation. Yes, if you see the building model based on the GeoInfo, you have standardized roof types, and we generate these roof types by semi-automatic extraction from the LiDAR point cloud. We are lucky the attributes are the same on the nationwide CityGML, so we don't have to think about changing the schema. We just change the data format. The data set is not finished. You see the green areas of Bavaria are finished quite now, and the rest will be finished within the next year. So we have a lot of data. And we do not only provide these data in the well-standardized data formats, we sell these data as well in more common data formats to the public. So we know the 2 nationwide standards are compatible, and we can transform the schema vice versa, and that's best practice. Now it was to find out, is it possible to transmit these data to the INSPIRE-BU standard? And so we had to try. That was not a task for a public office, as the Bavarian Agency for Digitization, High-Speed Internet and Surveying, that was a common research project with the Technical University in München. So the first thing you should do for such a project is to clean your base data. So we did a test, had a test tool for our source data and fixed errors to make them really standard conform. That's necessary so you save exception handlers and anything else. After having really clean source data, you can do the real work, define the transformation rules, and write them down machine readable. Then do the real transformation of the schema and test the result. And it was done. So you can use, if you have this, really standard tools. These standard tools are sometimes part of the operating system, and the performance is quite good. So you don't have only one-by-one mapping. You sometimes have case selections to match attributes, and this is really possible with the s.w.o.t standard, and so you transform the data. By this, the proof of concept was really successfully finished. So we have done this test, and that's the point we are now. It was not really done until now, so we just have the proof of concept. So that was quite quick. But
thank you,
it's
Joachim.
an easy work.
And thank you for saving us the time. So we have 13 minutes actually for the questions till the end of the session. So I will now like to open the floor really to all presenters. So I hope you wrote down your questions for them. So please, who will be the first? Are there any questions? Yeah, here it is. Just please, we need to take the microphone for the recording.
Thank you. Good morning. Excellent presentation. I refer to the last one. I have a question regarding how do you recognize buildings? Do you do field work? And I understand you combine Cadastre and LiDAR data. And then what happens in cases where there are adjacent buildings and you have to separate them and recognize each building and provide a unique ID for each building?
Yes.
Joachim, sorry, can you use the microphone for the recording? Mm-hmm.
There is no additional field work to be done. The Cadastre has 100% of the buildings. Even it's a common problem. If you extend your building in the Cadastre, you afterwards have two buildings. That's no problem. So it's it can be done by standard roof types, and those in computer 2 buildings have their roofs as they have yes, they have 2 roofs, 2 buildings have 2 roofs. We don't join these buildings logically at the moment, and the combination from the Cadastre to the LiDAR data is just on coordinates. The accuracy is good enough, and we know the level of the roof and see the form of the roof and can put the roof types on every building.
Thank you. Some more questions? Yes, please.
I have a question for Mark. It's about the European data portal. I wonder how you manage records that are harvested from different catalogs, the same records.
So you mean basically duplicates, for instance, if you harvest on different levels? So
I mean that if you have a record that's present in one catalog and also in another catalog, and it's the same record in principle.
yeah, we have this situation actually everywhere, because we harvest, for instance, in Germany, GovData.de, and we harvest GDI.de, and GDI is moving data, or let's say is being harvested from GovData.de as well. This is still a challenge. We try to avoid this by actually two things. First of all, actually our colleagues from Fraunhofer Focus are working on a way how to work with identifier, but even identifier are not, let's say, sufficient enough to deal with that. So they think about in the next, let's say, versions to come up with a new concept. That's one thing. The second thing is we expect at least at some levels, like the national level or even on a regional level, to have some, let's say, policies in place to avoid at least, let's say, obvious mistakes. So sometimes we realize we have local governments, for instance, that they are basically being harvested by regional portals, basically. Then they take data from the regional portals to take it down, basically, to serve it to open data portal. So we have the geosite. So it's going up, down, and if you start this game, basically, you create much more duplicates than necessary. So we need both. We need the technical solution, which our colleagues are working on, basically, and we need, let's say, policies to avoid this, if possible.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, there is one question here.
So basically, it might be adding to the previous question. Did you consider linked data concepts in your work, or is there any significant role of linked data?
Good question, but the wrong guy to ask, basically. It's we have a colleague which is basically not here, but he's working on this in European context already. Our plan is basically to put this in the next phase of the EDP. So for now, it's not really in it. So you have several ways to access the portal, either using the user face or using Sparkle, for instance. But using open linked data, basically, or linked open data is basically the next step. So this is something that is probably coming from next year on. But don't quote me on that. Okay.
Thank you. Any other? Yeah.
It's also a question for Mark. Sorry.
Mark, maybe you can keep staying there.
If I understand what you do, you harvest the CSW services from INSPIRE. And then how do you make a difference between open data and not open data? Is there an agreed way to define what is open data inside these catalogs?
Yeah, basically what we do is basically we harvest the CSW catalogs and map it basically, so from ISO standard to DKIT IP. So this is a component basically, and thanks to INSPIRE, we just needed to come up with 3 adapters. So actually 2. Another one is just for ESA data. But so from a technical point of view, we are, first of all, we have a mapping that is working quite well. The second thing is if we take the data, basically, we had a long discussion with the European Commission and within the consortium, what data is actually now really a must or nice to have. Because what we realized was basically that the number of data sets that are purely open data, according to attack at the license level, is, let's say, maybe interesting, but not showing basically the potential that we see. So it was taking the decision to, if you go to the portal, basically the 750K data sets are basically not purely open data. So, but you see, if you go deeper, basically you get the information, what kind of license is behind it. And we realize basically that the data owners basically, sometimes they are already let's say, committed to open data, so they tag their data, like in North Rhine-Westphalia, for instance, they tag their data using Creative Commons, for instance, license. Then it's very explicit. Sometimes you just have no clue, so you have to read basically through all the details of the license information to figure out what you can do with it or what not. Focus came up with an assistant, basically, that helps you basically to quicker realize, is it really free of use, basically, in terms of open data or Creative Commons, or is it basically limited? But this is actually something where the user is having a good game, basically, or an easy game, if there's a clear strategy at a local level. But if that's not the case, like in some countries, for instance, where they have not implemented an open data strategy already and have not tagged their data sets, let's say, per item as open data, then it's cumbersome.
Thank you. Any more questions for Mark? If not, maybe for other presenters. Are there any questions? Or we desperately need a coffee, it seems. Okay, so it won't stop us to have a bit longer coffee break. So I would like to thank again to all presenters. And thank all of you to be here with us. So we are closing this session. Thank you very much.